Hello, Inside Out. My name is Beth, and I get the privilege of leading Inside Out at Buckhead Church. Welcome back to gathering with us online. Now, let's be real. These are weird times. We've never experienced anything like this in our generation. Right now, we're living through a time that will be written about in history books, which is pretty crazy to think about. And now, I don't know about you, but in my personal life, I'm finding it to be pretty fitting that we're in a series about prayer right now. Both my husband and I are working from home, and we have a tiny one-bedroom apartment. We have nowhere to go to get away from each other. Our gyms are closed, and just like you, our small groups aren't meeting in person. We can't really hang out with our friends much, and we have no sports to watch on TV. We could use some prayer right now that we don't end up killing each other through all of this. And chances are you're starting to feel the same about your family. You've been stuck in your house away from your friends for a little while now, and chances are you're starting to feel it. Your siblings are driving you crazy, you're bored, and for the first time in your life, maybe you're ready to get back to school. And for a lot of you, the chaos you feel is bigger than just what's happening in your house right now. You have so much uncertainty about what's happening in the world. There may be people in your life that you are genuinely worried about. It's possible that you're overwhelmed with how much of your life seems up in the air right now. You don't know how all of this is going to affect your high school graduation or prom. Some of you are frustrated that trips you had planned are canceled and your spring break isn't going to look anything like you thought it would. And right now, more than any time I can remember in my life, the future seems so unclear. And when we face times like this, it seems to be a common thing for people to turn to prayer. Praying seems to comfort people. And while it's common in times like this to see more and more people talking about praying, I think a lot of us find ourselves wondering, can prayer really change things? Maybe you've asked God to bring a relationship into your life. Maybe you've asked God to save your parents' marriage. Or you've had a grandparent who was sick and you begged God to heal them. And it didn't happen. We could all list out some things that we asked God for and we didn't get it, or somehow the circumstances got worse. And it's made you wonder if your prayers are just a waste of time. And if that's you, this is a normal thing to wrestle with. It's certainly something I've wrestled with. But my hope is that today, as we continue looking at the prayer that Jesus modeled for us, it will provide more clarity around what prayer does have the power to change. And last week, Matt walked us through the beginning of this prayer where Jesus gives us the example to pray for God's kingdom to come and his will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. And today, I want us to look at the verse that comes immediately after that. It just simply says, "Give us today our daily bread," which seems like such a random thing to pray, but Jesus' original audience knew he was referring to an Old Testament account when the Israelites had to flee from Egypt to head to the Promised Land. And their journey was long, exhausting, and full of uncertainty. And while the Israelites are traveling in the desert, they find themselves hungry. So God does something crazy. Each day, he rains down bread from the sky, and the people are to gather just what they need each day. Listen to how this goes down in Exodus 16. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who had gathered much did not have too much. The one who had gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. So God is meeting the Israelites' need for food, but only for one day at a time. He could have made the bread last longer. In fact, on Fridays, people would gather twice as much bread to eat so they could eat on the Sabbath, and that bread didn't go bad until Sunday. God had the ability to give them an abundance of food that would last far into the future, but he didn't. And God chose to do things this way because he wanted the Israelites to rely on him daily. The Israelites' faith and trust in God grew each day as he followed through with his promise to provide for them. And I'm sure there were days that the Israelites went to bed wondering if that was their last meal. But then every day they would wake up to see that God had come through once more. They always had what they needed when they needed it. And when we look at the example of Jesus, he only prayed for his daily bread. He didn't ask for anything beyond that. But this wasn't just about food. It was about praying for what he needed God to follow through on for that day. Nothing else. He knew that his faith required a daily reliance on God to meet his needs. And this can be really hard to do because it forces us to take our eyes off the future and just think about today. And I don't know about you, but I can spend a lot of time worrying about the future. And right now, it's so easy to worry about what's ahead. We can easily find ourselves worrying about if things will get worse before they'll get better. But even on the days when life seems normal, it's so easy to find ourselves worrying about the future. If you're a senior, you probably just found out where you're going to college. And depending on what that decision was, you may find yourself worrying about a future that is unclear. You may find yourself worrying about whether or not you'll get married or have children one day. There may even be times where you don't really know what it is that you're worried about, but you're just worried about the future. And it's normal if you worry about the future, but if we're not careful, worry over the future can paralyze us. I mean, imagine how the Israelites felt as they fled the most powerful country in the world for an unknown destination across a desert. I'm sure they felt so much uncertainty about what was ahead of them. When we're in a similar position and fear of the future is leaving us paralyzed, what do? It seems like Jesus wants us to address that fear every time we pray. When we pray the way that Jesus prayed and ask God to give us our daily bread, it begins to do something in us. Just like the Israelites began to find a daily dependence on God to provide just what they needed for that day, it will begin to do the same for us. And I'm sure that over time, the Israelites grew to trust that God would always show up and be faithful. Their hearts began to shift, and so will ours, because prayer always changes our hearts. There's something healthy about admitting that we are not in charge of our future, but we know the person who is. He is in control of our future, and we have the opportunity to talk to him anytime we want. The truth is, prayer does change things, but it doesn't always change what we want it to change. Prayer always changes our hearts, and it might change our circumstances. And there's nothing wrong with praying about your future. You should pray about the future of our world. You should pray about what you're going to do after high school or whether or not marriage is in God's future plans for you. However, it is so much more helpful to break down those big worries into daily prayers that allow us to trust God to give us what we need today. So what do you need God to provide today? Is it peace? Is it clarity to make a decision? Is it patience? Is it hope? Even if you can't put words around what it is that you need, you can trust that God knows what you need and you can rely on him to give it to you. You can trust God with your future, and you can trust him to give you what you need today.